Cool. Okay, so what we're gonna do, guys, is learn on this little sort of overlapping set of shapes, kind of how to quickly and easily use the Pathfinder tool to kind of think about where two shapes overlap and intersect, how to turn that into its own isolated shape. And then we're also going to work on some stroke profile stuff. So first thing I'm going to do, go ahead and make my shapes. I'm going to use my ellipse tool. Keep in mind, guys, if you are having a hard time, I'm holding down the shift key, but if you are having, just kidding, or it's going to freeze, which is going to be great. Here we go. So I'm going to hold down my shift key so that I get a perfect circle. If I didn't line it, ooh, that was pretty good. But if I didn't line it up exactly, if I'm still holding down my mouse, keep in mind I can hold my space bar down and I can move my entire circle around while I'm still resizing it. So that's with my space bar and shift held down and my mouse still clicked. And then I can kind of get things lined up how I need to. Release my space bar, keep dragging. When I got it good, then I'm set. So keep in mind if you are sizing it correctly and you're happy with the size, but it's kind of off center slightly, you can use that space bar to then move the circle itself before you commit it. Or just make it and then nudge it over using your arrow keys or your mouse. So I made one. Hold on. I got ahead of myself. This is already a dashed line. So I made my circle. You can see it right there. I'm going to go ahead and use what tool for my rounded rectangle? Hey, thank you, Jagger. Rounded rectangle. We're going big today. So I'm going to make my rounded rectangle. Keep in mind that the rounded rectangle is a default, so I can use my my selection tools. I'm going to use my regular selection tool to grab these little belly button shapes. If you remember back in the day when you were learning level 1, 2, and 3, we used the belly button to kind of drag in all the corners so you can get those kind of exactly where you need them to be. If you had needed just one corner, you would use your direct select tool so you could isolate a specific corner and drag just one at a time if you wanted to do it that way. But of course, we want all of them to move in sequence. So I'm going to drag using my regular selection tool. All right. So I've got my two overlapping shapes now. And there's a couple ways to do this. I personally, there might even be a more efficient way to do this. But what I want you to see, because I think it's pretty at your level, is I'm going to go ahead and take all this and then copy the entire set of shapes. So how would I copy everything now that it's all selected? What you got? You could do Command C. You can also hold down Option. So holding down Option, just click and drag. Keep in mind the Option, click and drag, drags an exact copy of something and then leaves your original behind. So you can do it either way. So I'm going to do that over here, off to the side. And then, so I've got my original set and I've got my copy living over here. So now back on my original set, ultimately what I want is this gray shape, right? So once I have that, I can go to my Pathfinder tool. I'll pull up the panel. So again, in the classic layout, you should have a little Pathfinder panel over here. But you can also pull up the window, which is going to give you a few more options as well. Not just your shape modes, but your Pathfinders as well. And I'm going to use my third shape mode, which is my Intersect mode. So if I just click on that, what it's done now is cropped off anything that did not overlap. So everything that intersected and overlapped together is left behind. So now I've got that shape that I can easily make just a solid red shape. And I'm good. Now what I've done, the reason I made my copy is because now I can bring this back over, overlay it on top. And I still have these shapes, but they're separate, right? So now I have three separate shapes. I've got my rounded rectangle, I've got my circle, and I've got my little intersecting leaf kinda-ish shape, whatever you want to call that. Does that make sense to everybody? So intersect can be really helpful. There'll be times when that's a lot easier than using the pen tool. Like maybe you have a shape and you need a nice sort of half circle on the other half of it. Well, just put it in a circle, use your intersect, and you're done. Anybody know how if I wanted to select both my rounded rectangle and my circle, I would do that? I'm going to hold down Shift. So I click on my rounded rectangle, holding down Shift, I click on my circle. So those two shapes are selected. And now I can go ahead and I can mess with my stroke a little bit more. And we talked about stroke profile yesterday. There are ways that if you look up here where it says basic and I drop down, there is a dashed line option. I don't love it. If you look at it, it's a little much. It's like extremely dashed. So I'm not going to use that in this instance, but just know that you do have lots of options here. And you also have at the bottom of this panel, you've got your libraries menu. And there's tons of different types of lines that you can use. And we'll get into that a little bit more later on in the semester. But you can always check out a panel, expand it out. There's tons of options. You know, I can say, I want this arrow. I don't. That would be awful. But you can give it arrows. You can do whatever. You can give it that. Holy moly. That's insane. That kind of looks like a weird, like, Celtic kind of thing. I don't know. And again, if you want to see, I mean, there's tons of options. And you can also use your next arrow to go to, you know, sort of subsequent galleries and see lots of different options for different kind of lines you can have. So your stroke gallery, effect gallery is going to be really helpful at various points in your artistic career. But I don't want any of that. Instead, what I want is my standard line. Go back.
How about we have them just change it to any other kind of line style?
It's a great idea. Yeah, go ahead and you could do any line style. That'd be fine with me, like Mr. Roberts is saying. The other thing is, if you want these specific dashes, I would go to stroke. We looked at this yesterday and get my whole stroke panel to come up. And then there is, under where I did my alignment, there's a dash line option. I'm going to click it. Dashed. And I can make it do whatever. It's a 12-point dash. And you can say exactly how big you want your dashes to be. Right now, the default is 12. But you could say I want a 10-point dash and a 5-point gap and a 10-point, you know, and that would do it all. Or you could put in like 10, 5, 5, 1, and have like alternating sizes of dashes. You can do whatever, but if you look at it now, that's the dash line that I got. So you can customize your dashed lines in by clicking on stroke and getting your stroke panel up and clicking that line. Now keep in mind, if you have that, that's great. And now if I go and I make another shape, it's a default. I don't know if you can see that very well, but its default is going to be a dashed line because that's where I left things off with my stroke. So I would need to then go in and kind of turn the dashed off so it doesn't then do that for every subsequent shape that I'm making. Okay? So that is how you would approach that line and this task. I think the heart, we kind of could take what we learned yesterday about using stroke profiles, going up to object path, outline stroke to do that as well. And then in a minute, we'll talk about touch type. So go ahead and work on these, or sort of this one, and we'll talk about touch type in a minute.